Meta. Mark Zuckerberg says Meta plans to lay off 13% of its staff, or 11,000 plus employees, and will cut discretionary spending and extend its hiring freeze through Q1. Again, important to state, it is extraordinarily unfortunate that 11,000 people won't have employment today, tomorrow. It's not clear when this takes effect. I'll also point out at the top the Meta note, which is this communication comes directly from the company, and it puts Mark Zuckerberg says right at the top. It's possible this particular headline was massaged, and that if we click through to the official PR statement that's hosted on Meta's servers, that it won't read in exactly the same way. But in contrast to a statement given to a traditional media organization of record, it just comes directly from the business. But the meat of this is 13% staff reduction. It's a significant percentage. A hiring freeze that lasts through the end of March, and a cut in discretionary spending. Maybe, again, if we double click, single click, don't need to double click on the web, into this, we'll learn more about what the definition of discretionary spending is in this context. But if I had to guess, if I had to place a bet, Reality Labs isn't considered discretionary spending to Zuck. There are all manner of other aspects of their business which I'm sure they will label discretionary and will stop spending on those. But this belief that Zuck has about where the puck is going and his attempt to skate to where it will be, none of that's discretionary in his eyes. It is existential. You must spend money on this. And I think it's worth understanding that, or at least considering, the idea that he's absolutely right. There are headsets which exist today. Quest Pro that Meta just announced is a perfect example, as well as headsets which will exist in the near future. Apple's alleged entry into this market that's coming any day now, which are as state-of-the-art as can be built, and yet they are big, bulky, with weak batteries and lackluster graphic systems displays. Where we need to get to is an environment where, take my particular killer app for buying a headset like this, can I put this headset on and lay back in a comfortable chair and watch a feature-length film, 2 to 3 hours, and not have physical fatigue from having a thing on my head, have it last for 3 hours of playback, obviously, and for it to meet or exceed the experience of a high resolution display that is, 2 feet from my face, which is the display that I'm looking at right now where I see myself, or a slightly less high resolution display that is 15 feet from my face, but is 50, 60, 70 inches across. That's the bar in my mind. And that's only the bar for mixed reality. That's only the bar for a device which is going to deliver predominantly a synthetic experience with some amount of uh, live feed of the real world. That's not anywhere close to something that is as light and comfortable, capable of being worn for 8 hours, a pair of sunglasses, which predominantly display the real world without sort of pointing a camera sensor at the real world and then displaying that camera's feed, but actually display the real world, let you see through, and then render some amount of synthetic elements on top of the real world. And while we're talking about the moderate to far future, it also has to render those synthetic elements relative to the positions of real world objects. If I'm walking down the street and someone whom I've met before, but whose name I don't recall and whose face I might not recognize, the software has to be able to draw some level of box around that person's head and label them as, this is a person who sends their kids to the same school as yours, therefore it's probably worth saying hello. It has to track that individual through space because that individual's moving and I'm moving. It has to do all of that work and put the synthetic elements in place in motion. If you don't think that engineering those capabilities is going to require the level of capex that Zuck is putting into action and is so committed to doing over time that Wall Street looks at it and says, you're going to burn down your existing business, which makes all of us a pretty penny. I don't think you're paying attention. Like, we won't get there. Maybe it's possible that there's genuine innovation to be found, and it's simply a matter of sort of waiting for that piece of human ingenuity to be discovered. But like it or not, Zuck's not interested in waiting. He's going to go build it. And he's going to utilize all of the money printing machinery that he's built to date at Facebook, Meta, to finance and enable the building of that stuff. And so cutting a material percentage of your workforce, not adding to the cost of your workforce at all for the next 4 months, and finding any other place where fat, which is to say money that doesn't need to be spent on what I think if you got Zuckerberg in a sort of private off the record moment, he would acknowledge is the maintenance mode products. Um, that's what it's going to take. And so, as much as, again, I have empathy for the people who won't have jobs, somebody's got to be willing to put this level of resource against this problem if we're going to get to a place where we can wear computers on our faces for whatever you think that's worth. Changpeng Zhao at CZ underscore Binance. Binance CEO Changpeng Zhao says the company signed a non-binding letter of intent to acquire FTX.com and help cover its liquidity crunch, pending due diligence. Related, Tom Maloney, Bloomberg. Sam Bankman-Fried's estimated $15.6 billion fortune has been eviscerated in days by the demise of FTX and Alameda, dropping to around $1 billion, the largest one-day collapse ever. Sharia Malwa, CoinDesk. In the wake of FTX's dramatic fall, Binance, Gate.io, KuCoin, Poloniex, BitGet, Huobi, and OKX pledge to release their Merkle Tree reserve certificates. I love you. Have fun. Also related, Angus Berwick, Reuters. In a message to staff, FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried says withdrawals on FTX.com are effectively paused after FTX saw around $6 billion of net withdrawals in 72 hours. Also related, Joshua Oliver, Financial Times, memo. Binance CEO Changpeng Zhao says FTX's near collapse severely shook confidence in the crypto industry, offering some deal details and halts FTT sales. Also related, Daniel Kuhn, CoinDesk, how Binance exacerbated a bank run on FTX before offering to acquire the company, and why the potential deal represents a meteoric fall for Sam Bankman-Fried. Also related, Helen Partz, Cointelegraph. Hours after announcing an emergency deal with Binance, FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried deletes a Twitter thread saying the exchange and assets were fine. Blockchains over crypto. There's too much here to just blow past this, so spend a couple minutes, I suppose. The head of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried. Did I get that right? Yeah. Going from being worth $15.6 billion to around $1 billion in a matter of days. Welcome to the consensual hallucination that is free market capitalism. This person didn't have $15.6 billion, which is to say, they did not hold assets which were by and large agreed upon to be worth that much money. And we know that because in a very short period of time, the assets that Bankman-Fried holds didn't change. It's just the perceived value by all of the other actors around those assets, that changed. The opinions of what those assets were worth shifted. It's worth pointing out that, where was it? Oh, it's the next story. Skip ahead to the next story. Bitcoin lost 10%, whereas something tells me the value of FTX lost a hell of a lot more than 10%. It's also interesting to look at the story that insinuates that Binance exacerbated the run on FTX before stepping in to help. Again, all of this is these sort of market machinations, which I don't find particularly interesting to discuss. Is there some potential long-term value in currency that we all sort of generally describe as cryptocurrency? I'm willing to say yes, but the notion that it's worth so much that one business that's built up around enabling the movement of those currencies, that the person who owns and controls the sort of founding shares of that business, that person is worth $15 billion US dollars, backed by the US federal government, least likely to default entity on planet Earth. Small footnote, because it controls its own treasury and it can just continue to create money out of thin air and then pay itself and all of its other debtors back over time. Like, these things are fictitious, and they are only as real as there are other actors on the planet which agree that they're worth something. And so today, you could take Bitcoin or Ether or whatever Solana trades in, or whatever FTX and Binance and CoinDesk. You can take all of those units, and in theory, you can like go buy a sandwich. The fundamental issue here is that, at least in the United States, you have to convert those things into US dollars in order to buy the sandwich. There are other places in the world where you can pay for that sandwich in one of those cryptocurrencies. But let's remember, it takes every other entity in the system to agree that those cryptocurrencies have value today and will have value in the future. So even in the alternate reality where I can go downtown and buy a sandwich with a cryptocurrency today, the business who accepts the cryptocurrency now has a choice. Are they going to that was weird. Are they going to hold that cryptocurrency and spend it on something else? Or are they going to, well, let's simplify. Can they turn around and pay the suppliers of their ingredients to make the sandwich in cryptocurrency? Or are they going to have to go to an exchange and convert to a fiat currency in order to pay for the bread and the chicken and the lettuce and the mayonnaise? Like, we got to get over that level of those series of hurdles before I think any of these things are going to have any sort of utility aside from a store of value, a digital gold, which thus far seems like Bitcoin manages to continue to be. Tanya Machiel, CNBC. Solana crashes 30% plus to around $18. Bitcoin falls 10% plus to $17,500 and briefly hits 17,300 on September 8, its lowest since September 2020. Ether drops 15% to around $1,250. Related, Divya Balji, Bloomberg. Coinbase's stock closed down 10.78%, and Robinhood Markets closed down 19.04% as the Binance FTX deal spotlights the challenges facing the crypto industry. Also related, Adam James, The Block. Nansen, over the past 24 hours, around $1 billion in Ether, $950 million in USDC, $400 million in Tether, and $195 million in BUSD have been withdrawn from exchanges. Again, more of the same. Many of these currencies don't seem to hold a tremendous amount of value the moment there is a sort of shock to the larger system of cryptocurrency tooling and industry. Solana taking a 30% haircut is a big deal. Ether taking a 15% haircut is a big deal. Bitcoin taking a 10% haircut is a big deal. But as those numbers shrink, you can almost use them as sort of collective signal from the community of people and actors who care to value them at all about how durable they think each of those things are. Bitcoin continues to be remarkably durable, and having been around the longest, we can sort of zoom out and look at the chart and see that, Bitcoin continues to go up and to the right, and every time it stutters, it works its way back up, sometimes significantly higher than it was before. And say what you will about whether we're likely to get to a place where people are spending Bitcoin to buy chicken sandwiches. Point is, it continues to exist as a thing that maintains significant value when compared to US dollars, which, in order to bring us back to my overall feeling of blockchains over crypto, it's telling that every single one of these things, whenever they're discussed, are denominated in US dollars. I'll be curious to see if we get to a point where any of the sort of second tier cryptocurrencies begin to be discussed in denominations of sats instead of US dollars, but who knows? Jay Peters, The Verge. Twitter plans to label select accounts official when the new blue launches. Not all previously verified accounts will get the label, which won't be for sale. Credit to Twitter's product team some time ago, laying exactly the same sort of groundwork. You'll notice if you go to the verified Twitter account for any individual who is running for political office yesterday, there's a line item that says government official. And if you'll look around for some automated accounts, they're labeled as bots. This is where we move beyond the blue check mark. Having a binary state for understanding your user base and therefore enabling any individual user in the system to understand what sort of an account they're interacting with is a bad idea. You don't want just, oh, they're verified or oh, they're not. You want more than that. You want higher resolution. And so rolling out an official label would make all the sense in the world if you are a relevant public figure or if you are a business entity. And that is a meaningfully different thing than you are an individual user who is willing to put some hard currency up in order to assert that you are, by and large, a well-meaning actor on the platform. So, great, do this, roll it out in a way which is sustainable, which does not lionize people working 20-hour days, because businesses shouldn't need to ask that of people in order to make meaningful progress. That said, are these extraordinary circumstances for Twitter? Absolutely. Thomas Germain, Gizmodo. Research suggests Apple collects data about iPhone usage even when the iPhone analytics setting to disable the sharing of device analytics altogether is off. Is anyone surprised by this? It's an end user license agreement. Like, nobody reads that document. They press agree so that they can continue with the setup process. And then there are pieces of that agreement, which sharing device analytics is one, which are highlighted, made available for the user to put forth some preference. And I think, I would hope that this research not only suggests that there are some device analytics and usage information which is shared with Apple regardless of which option you choose at that stage of the setup process, but that it also attempts to clarify what information is optional for the user to divulge and what information is not. Because if all someone has done is take the time and energy to form the conclusion that there is information about how an individual uses their device, which is shared with the manufacturer of the device, what have you uncovered? Like, what have you revealed? How have you helped people understand the agreement they're entering into? Have you done anything more than what any reasonably literate individual could probably do themselves if they actually sat down and read the end user license agreement? I'm making no claims about the uh, the convenience or the likelihood that anyone is going to go do that work as an end user. Of course they're not. It's written by attorneys, and there are a lot of attorneys in the world whom, as people, I love very deeply, but I also think deep down they understand that at least some aspect of their job is fundamentally about crafting language which is opaque to the average individual, because it enables their clients to do things that, when described in plain language, uh, the average individual would not be okay with. But that's the water we all swim in, man. I don't know what to tell you. Wall Street Journal. Sources. TSMC plans to announce a second chip-making factory north of Phoenix, Arizona in the coming months, investing roughly $12 billion and aiming to make 3-nanometer chips. Good. Let's diversify our dependence on semiconductor manufacturing in the backyard of a government which we'll say the United States is not on the best of terms with. There are a couple of thoughts that come to mind here. How much of this $12 billion is TSMC being loaned? Right? Are they taking $12 billion out of their own pocket? Or is maybe one of the wealthiest businesses ever helping to underwrite this because it's in their interest? I think that's possible. Number two, I don't know enough about semiconductor manufacturing, but I get the sense that like climate control and water are meaningful inputs into the semiconductor manufacturing process. And so building a facility in a part of the world, or we'll scope it a little tighter, a part of the United States which gets extraordinarily hot and does not have a lot of sort of naturally occurring water supply. Is that an investment that's going to pan out, or is a part of the country that already has issues with those two fundamental factors for human existence going to become even more pressurized? And then lastly, actually, no, that's really all that comes to mind there. Philippe Esposito, 9 to 5 Mac. Apple is working on a custom accessibility mode for iOS 16.2 Beta 2, codenamed Clarity, helping make the iPhones and iPads UI more user-friendly. Things I did not have on my bingo card: the notion that the interface, which has been honed for, God, we're coming up on 20 years, right? iOS was shown off to the world in 2007, which means there's probably betas floating around inside the company in 2006, maybe 2005. The notion that it has matured to a place where there's a voice at the table with Craig Federighi lobbying for an easy mode is quite a thing. I suppose it was inevitable, maybe. These devices are more capable than any computing device that's come before them. They are more versatile. They can be used to do incredibly complex things. And so perhaps if, as an end user, all you really need is the ability to make a call and send a text message, there should be a mode where that's all the interface presents to you. And that sort of an experience can certainly be had with the platforms as they exist today, but it does take a significant amount of, frankly, understanding and experience in order to know which switches you have to flip and what you have to do in order to provide that simplified experience. So maybe this is worth doing. Last thing it's worth saying, it's absolutely an area where the iPad can use help, because it continues to be the strangest of sort of modern computing platforms. It is more extensible and sort of elastic than the phone is, for obvious reasons. And, if you're listening to the community of people who are trying to push the iPad to its limits, it's still, after years, sort of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of progression. So maybe simplifying some things there would be helpful. I don't know. Gem, Aswad, Variety. YouTube says music and premium together have 80 million plus paid subscribers, up from 50 million in September 2021, and payments to creators and others reached $50 billion since 2019. There was a time when, I believe it was Scott Galloway, banged a drum, bonged a drum, which said spinning YouTube out of Google would be a good thing for the market in general. I don't know if I agree with that, because even in a world where YouTube becomes an independent company tomorrow, it's still the 800-pound gorilla in its space. And the notion that Google would turn around and build a video property to compete with it, or the notion that any other video streaming service, or let's be clear, per this headline, streaming service, media delivery machine, the notion that any of those competitors, Vimeo, if you're an old head like me, that they have like better footing to compete in a universe where YouTube is separated from Google. I don't know if I buy that either. And so I guess the question is, why do I bring that up? I think I bring it up because that thought exercise helps understand this growth and this maturation of YouTube. You know, it's started as a tool to put video on the web back when that was a difficult thing to do. And frankly, what it is today rivals traditional television. You know, like, I don't know if you can get the data, but if you took like a if you sort of took a Nielsen rating style view, something tells me there are millions of people who are spending 80% of their watching hours with YouTube and not with DirecTV or Comcast or Prime Video, which are what compete with YouTube. Right? That's sort of tautological, but I think you get the point. The notion that music is a meaningful component is still odd to me, but a lot of people like to listen to playlists. And even in a world where, I suppose, what would be interesting to see in the near future for YouTube, find me the recording artist who ships an album on YouTube and says, here's a playlist, it's 15 tracks, and it is the exact same 15 tracks in exactly the same sequence as the same entry in Spotify's database or Apple Music's database or Prime Music's database. Like, because if you're going to spend the money to get access to that celestial jukebox, spending it with Apple or Amazon or Spotify, it certainly gets you the music. What it doesn't get you, though, is the ability to go to the single largest corpus of video content ever. Something tells me I'm not wrong in describing YouTube that way. And it strips all the advertising out. Like, that seems like a much better way to spend $15 a month to get both of those things as opposed to just one of them. But I don't know whether they'll do it. We'll find out. Tom Matsuda, The Block. Crypto payments startup Ramp raised $70 million Series B, co-led by Mutabala Capital and Corellia Capital at an estimated $450 million plus valuation. Related, Brandy Betts, CoinDesk, blockchain intelligence startup TRM Labs raised a $70 million Series B extension led by Thoma Bravo, bringing the round to $130 million. I spent more energy on crypto today than I wanted to. I'll simply say that it's an unfortunate day to be announcing your investment in a crypto startup, but you got to do what you got to do. Frederic Lardinois, TechCrunch. IBM announces its Osprey quantum processor with 433 qubits, up from 127 qubits in the 2021 Eagle processor, and plans to hit 4,000 qubits by 2025. I am utterly unable to comment in a meaningful way on the evolution of quantum computing hardware. So I suppose I'll simply say it's, as someone that is as old as I am, it warms my heart to see IBM leading the way in hardware. But that's it. Nilay Patel, The Verge, an interview with CEO Dylan Field on scaling Figma, selling the company to Adobe, retaining autonomy, WebGL, making VR Figma for the metaverse, AGI, and more. This will definitely be one to read / listen to. I think that Adobe buying Figma was a great idea, and I continue to believe that Dylan Field should probably wind up running all of Adobe product by the end of this decade. I'm willing to place that long bet that he will, because look at what they built with Figma. They built a tool which does jobs Photoshop used to do, and which other products Adobe has built mostly from scratch in order to offer to that market, and Figma has completely run away with it. So the points of view which Field holds on things like doing software design in the metaverse, AGI and its utility to the job of software design or design of any kind in a digital tool set. Those are points of view which not only will be interesting to learn, but I, again, am willing to bet probably represent a more ideal, if not likely, version of the future than what most of Adobe's toolkit exhibits through its existence. Adobe's tools are the industry standard in a variety of areas for many, many, many good reasons. But they are, by and large, built from a set of ideas and a set of assumptions about how to do computing that no longer hold. And so I think people like Field represent the future for a business like Adobe's. Lauren Forrestal, TechCrunch. Disney hit 235.7 million global streaming subscribers in Q4, above Netflix's 223.1 in Q3. Disney Plus had 164.2 million subscribers. Hulu had 47.2, and ESPN Plus had 24.3. you got to have the content people want in order to have them pay you for access to it. And Disney owns a lot of what people want to see. They own a lot of sports access in America. They own a lot of sort of mature content, which is to say Hulu's products. And they own the definitive home for family-friendly content. Netflix has spent a tremendous amount of energy and time trying to develop those things. And I think there was a moment, whether that moment's in the past or whether we're still living in it right now, where one could argue that Netflix succeeded in becoming HBO before HBO could become Netflix. But they're nowhere near becoming Disney. And frankly, I don't see them becoming Disney. I don't see where the next piece of intellectual property which can support another decade of content, short form, long form, on a screen, in person. I mean, there could be another Pirates of the Caribbean movie that takes the world by storm and uses a synthetic version of Jack Sparrow. Like, stranger things have happened. Netflix has no inroad there. Maybe they have the balance sheet to go buy the rights to, I don't know, all of Formula One streaming the next time those rights come up, or the Olympics. Like, I don't know, Netflix go buy NBC and therefore consume the rights to the Olympics. Maybe it's possible. I'm not that familiar with Netflix's balance sheet. But what I do know is that Disney can produce Star Wars content and Marvel content and any and all content related to Mickey Mouse or whatever the crew in Emeryville want to ship as the next Pixar film. All of those things accrue to Disney and not to Netflix. So Disney strike me as the media streaming business to beat at this point, and that's all I have to say. James Batchelor, gamesindustry.biz. Nintendo announces Nintendo Systems, a joint venture with DENA, which co-developed Nintendo games for mobile like Super Mario Run, set to open in April 2023. It's not entirely clear from the headline what exactly is going on, but my assumption is that this is Nintendo taking a step toward developing its own games for platforms that it doesn't control. And that's a tale as old as time. That's a tale as old as I am. For as long as I've been alive, well, slightly less than that. There's been this open question of, will Nintendo ever license its intellectual property to other gaming platforms? Super Mario Run was, I think, successful. Didn't pay super close attention to it, but the point is, I played it because it's Mario, and I can absolutely say that I would very likely pick up the Zelda franchise. I don't think I've ever played a Zelda game for more than like 5 minutes, in part because I don't own Nintendo equipment, and I'm not likely to. Like, I get that the Switch is popular, but like, I don't want to have that many things in my life that have, you know, digital displays and have to be plugged in to be charged and all the rest of it. Whereas if I could load a Zelda game onto the computer I already have, I'd love to do that, to the extent that I spend my time playing video games, which is these days not very often. But were I in a slightly different place in my life, had more leisure time, to say nothing of the sorts of games I would feel good about handing to my child and saying, entertain yourself with this. Nintendo's content is some of the best around, has been for decades. And so while I can sort of respect and appreciate that their business is very vertically integrated, I personally would rather live in a world where I don't have to go buy dedicated hardware in order to play a Castlevania game. Pretty sure that's Nintendo content, but I could be wrong. So hopefully this is a sign of good things to come in terms of people having access to some of the greatest video games ever made. Dylan Martin, The Register. Intel announces a new Xeon CPU family and updated data center GPUs, both part of the Max series lineup, set to arrive in early 2023. Talk about a company in transition. Intel has got their back against the wall, and I don't know. I don't really have a strong feeling about whether or not Intel should continue to exist. Uh, they've made good chips for a very long time. If they continue to make good chips, then that's great. But I don't know. I think we've got to maintain very much a wait and see approach in terms of this business's future. Rebecca Elliott, Wall Street Journal, filings. After taking over Twitter, Elon Musk sold 19.5 million Tesla shares, worth almost $4 billion, between November 4th and 8th. Musk retains a roughly 14% stake in Tesla. The only thing that this brings to mind for me is a relevant detail to Elon's sort of leadership style. There are a plethora of reasons to dislike the way Elon leads a business. But with Tesla, one thing he has done over time, which I don't really see a way one can honestly criticize, is he doesn't have super voting control. He doesn't have some kind of alternate equity in the business that protects him from changes in opinion of the shareholders, which is what Zuckerberg has at Meta. It's what Larry and Sergey have with Google Alphabet. What Musk has done over and over again is simply say, tie my compensation to the business's performance. I think that historically has included the share price, but it's not exclusively the share price. And he maintains a certainly material percentage of ownership of Tesla, but not so much that if he harms the business in an existential way, that he gets to retain control over it. The business has to perform. It has to do the thing it's meant to do and do it well and continue to do it better and better over time in order for him to be compensated. And that is, again, I think sort of a breath of fresh air in its simplicity. It's very straightforward. If Tesla stopped selling cars because they weren't made well enough, or they weren't price competitive, or the charging network or other aspects of the ownership experience were outcompeted in the marketplace, Elon's compensation and over time his position as the leader of the business would be jeopardized. You can't say that about Larry and Sergey at Alphabet or Zuck at Meta. And I don't know, I think it's a good thing. He's very clearly not the most humane person to run a business, but he does seem to operate in a judge me on the business's performance metric, which what more can you ask of anyone at the end of the day? Financial Times sources: TikTok cut its 2022 revenue target from 12 to 14.5 billion dollars to around $10 billion in September, as some staff complain of overspending on salaries, social events, and more. TikTok as a business continues to be a black box for the most part, and so maybe there's something especially interesting to read here if the Financial Times got people to, again, unsourced, but speak openly about the way the business operates, the way it spends money. But the notion that they're cutting their revenue target, I'd be shocked if that was ultimately because of paying people too much. Maybe it is. Maybe the top 20%, the top 5% of TikTok employees need to be extraordinarily compensated in order to build what they're building. Interesting ethical and possibly moral quandaries. Social events, making a material impact on a business that has a $10 billion annual revenue run rate. I find that hard to believe, but talking about some of the most profitable entities ever, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a party that's got a $10 million price tag attached to it. But what I think is more worth mentioning here is, again, this sort of story about the way information is reported. Sources, thing that I put in air quotes, refers to individuals who are not willing to have their names attached to the information that they're divulging. That's always a area where it's worth pausing, sort of hesitating, contemplating. But the other component is the Financial Times, and I think The Economist does this as well. They don't attribute the information that they're reporting to an individual reporter, which is the way the New York Times operates, the Wall Street Journal operates, many other traditional media organizations. They place the individual who's reporting the information at the same layer as the entity which is publishing the information. And another thing that Chamath Palihapitiya mentioned on a recent episode of the All In podcast is that model of saying, we, the organization that is the New York Times, are alongside this one human being asserting that the following information is accurate, honest, fit to print, to borrow the Times' slogan. That's worked for a long time, but do we still live in that world? Do we still live in a world where it makes sense for an entity which is supposed to be able to provide relevant information without a bias, without an editorial viewpoint, the view from nowhere? Can you do that if you're also citing an individual who's no doubt in 2022 got a brand of their own on the internet? I'm not sure that it's not to say that it doesn't work. I just wonder whether separating those things makes more sense. It would increase opacity, which might get weird. You could certainly envision a version of the future where someone is publishing a certain set of information under their own name using Substack's toolkit, someone else's toolkit, and at the same time is authoring content for an entity like the Wall Street Journal. That might get strange, but there's a cleanliness there, which is the editorial nucleus of an organization like the Wall Street Journal gets to put forth their principles and their ethic without having to bind themselves to whatever opinions, principle, ethic every single one of the writers they employ is also putting out into the world under their own name. So I don't know. I highly doubt that any of these newspapers is going to choose to go run this experiment, but I think it would be rad to see one of them try.